Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Hi, my name is Harvey and I'm an alcoholic. I want to thank Mike for asking me to speak. Jesus. I only have one question. Does the alarm go off? I mean, if it were me, I'd set the alarm. I've been feeling a little weird, so you'll have to excuse me. I've been fighting a cold for the last 6 days. I haven't felt good for the last 6 days. I've taken all this, I took this homeopathic stuff and all this vitamin C I've been taking, and I mean, I should have just let the cold happen. Those go away in 3 days, and I would have been fine. Instead, I've just been feeling weird for 6. I'll tell you in a general way what I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm like today. I don't remember much as a kid other than I was always angry, always on edge, and full of fear. My biggest fear was getting out of bed in the morning. I knew that as soon as I got out of bed that the day was going to go downhill because I was a fraud. And it didn't make any difference how well educated I became or how successful I became in business. That feeling carried on well into my adulthood. I just knew that I was a fraud, and it was a terrible, terrible feeling. I got drunk for the first time when I was 12 years old. I do not understand what people say when they say they've crossed the imaginary line into alcoholism. I heard one person describe it that imaginary line were their lips. It's because that's what it was with me. As soon as I just got drunk, and I have never had a drink. I've never had a drink. I've never had a glass of wine. I don't understand people that can do that. If I wore a hat, I'd take it off to them, but I just don't understand that. I got drunk. It was 2 weeks after my 12th birthday. It was a great feeling. Jack Daniels. Got drunk on Jack Daniels. I love Jack Daniels. I drank Jack Daniels for the rest of my life until I stopped drinking. It's wonderful. I love the smell of Jack Daniels. I still love the smell of Jack Daniels. When I had about 9 months of sobriety, I tried to start or explored the possibility of starting an aftershave lotion with the aroma of Jack Daniels, because I felt that everybody thought that like I did. So my sponsor pointed out that he didn't like Jack Daniels. I was shocked. I just couldn't believe that not everybody liked Jack Daniels. I had my first spiritual experience that night. My arms were wrapped around the toilet bowl as I was throwing up into it, and I screamed out, "Oh God, I love this," and that was it. And I repeated that action every chance I could get. Obviously it was on the weekends, but that's what I did. And I started smoking dope when I was about 15, and I went through college drinking and smoking dope and taking an upper every now and then when I needed to stay up all night, and that was never, for something important, which never included studying. It was when there was something important to do, And I'm not going to bore you with a long drunkalog because it was boring. I basically did the same thing day after day after day, and I'm going to tell you what a typical day was for me. I discovered this drug that would allow me to get out of bed in the morning. It allowed me to leap out of bed in the morning, and I'd fill my nose up with this drug, and as you can tell, my nose is kind of large, so it took a lot up into it, And that'd get me out of bed and into the shower and dressed and downstairs for my morning cup of coffee. And then I discovered God's gift to the human race. It was a pill called Val Release. It kept 5 milligrams of Valium in your body on a 24-hour time release basis. They were wonderful, and I took 6 or 7 of those with my morning cup of coffee. and then I took 4 Fiorinol with codeine number 4s for the headache I knew was coming on, you know, and then I went to work. God help anybody that was in front of me on the freeway, but I went to work, you know. And I got into work and I stayed there till 11:30. I worked up on the Sunset Strip, and a quarter of a block down from my favorite watering hole, a place called the Cock and Bull on Sunset Boulevard. And I used to walk up to the Cock and Bull at 11:30 every day, and I'd stay there from 11:30 to 1:30 every day. I loved that place. I had my own stool there, third from the end. I'll tell you what my ambition was. We had a guy that had the end stool. I didn't want that. But the guy on the end stool was an old character actor named Frank Ferguson. I can break Frank's anonymity. He died as a result of this disease. He never got sober. And when Frank died, they put a little brass plaque on the bar and it said, you know, "Here drank Frank," or something like that. And I figured that's what I wanted. And I figured after I died, you know, somebody would come up with something that would rhyme with Harvey. You know, it wasn't up to me. But that's what I did. Anyway, I was there from 11:30 to 1:30 every day. Then I go back to work. Then I'd be back up the Cock and Bull at 3:30 from about 3:30 to 5. And I was not a real heavy drinker, you know. It was 7 drinks an hour, 6 drinks an hour. My friend Kip did 7. I could never catch him, you know. Did 6 drinks an hour. It's all I could do. And so I'd be there from 3:30 to 5 there, and then I'd go back to work. And then I'd get back up there again about 7:30, and I'd stay there for as long as it took, whatever the definition of it was that night, you know. It was just the way it was. And I repeated that action every day of my life for 12 and a half years. And then after 12 and a half years, I started to abuse alcohol and drugs. Because the truth of the matter was, if I could have kept that routine going and stayed alive, I'd probably still be doing it today. Because that wasn't overdoing anything. That was the only way that I could function on a daily basis. It allowed me to build up a business. I was a business manager in the entertainment industry, and it allowed me to function, allowed me to work, allowed me to meet with clients, to talk to people, to handle things. I could never have done that otherwise. I was so full of fear, and I knew, and no self-esteem whatsoever. So consequently, I was probably the most arrogant schmuck in the world. You know, it's the truth of the matter is, the only way that I could feel good was if I could make you feel worse. That was the only way that I ever felt good. It's if I could make you feel worse, then I felt better. You know, I mean, it was crazy. There's a page in the 12 and 12 in the 4th step about our twisted relations with family and friends. That, you know, I read that one day and I was shocked because it described me down to, you know, to my shoes. I mean, it was just the perfect description of me. Anyway, I started to abuse everything at that point, and my business went to hell. I mean, it just dropped off because I wasn't functioning anymore. I could no longer handle things. So what I did, and I still had expenses, so what I did was I stole money from some clients, like that. Didn't give it a second thought. You know, I'd always prided myself on my honesty and my integrity. I'd been offered kickbacks for years, you know, and I had literally millions of dollars running through the various bank accounts. I could have set up dummy corporations and phony bills and all that stuff, and I never did any of that. But when I needed money, I didn't even think about it. I just ripped it off, you know, and I didn't do it very, very wisely, so I ended up getting caught. It wasn't that long, you know, it didn't take that long, and I got caught. And it broke in the papers because it was a Hollywood case. There were some actors involved. And Hollywood cases break in the papers. Nothing to the magnitude of what's going on now, but then, you know, I didn't kill anybody, but it hit I'll tell you, it broke on the front page of the LA Times on the morning of my daughter's bat mitzvah. Figure that one out. And I had to go to that affair with 400 of my ex-wife's nearest and dearest friends, you know, and function. And I don't really remember much about that day because whatever I was doing at that point, I just tripled it and went, you know, and took all sorts of new things that somebody had given me, and I went. A few things I remember, none of it good, but and then one of the more frightening things about it is that my daughter tells me I was fine, which meant that I was acting the way I'd always been acting, so I don't know how good that was. But you see, I didn't get sober at that point because I didn't know that I had a problem. My problem was not alcohol and drugs. My problem were people. If they just left me the hell alone, I'd be fine. That's the way I believe. Just leave me alone, and I'd be fine. It took almost a year to the day later. Almost a year to the day, I was in temple on a holiday called Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day in the Jewish religion. It is the day we are there asking God to atone for our sins. And it's, God knew I needed to be there for 3 or 4 months, but it's a one-day gig, and that's all he got. So, but I was in there, and we sang this prayer, and I got very emotional over it, and I don't know why. I started to cry. And I turned to my girlfriend and my 2 kids, and I said, "Excuse me, I have to go to the bathroom." And I went into the bathroom, and I pulled out this little emergency stash of cocaine that I used to carry with me for the many emergencies that would happen throughout the day. And I was about to do a couple of toots of this, and I said, "Why am I doing this?" And I threw it out. Just threw it out. Now, at that point, I had for 18 years, I was a daily user of alcohol and drugs. 18 years. I had never once felt remorse. I had never once said what I was doing was wrong, because I had no idea what I was doing was wrong. I had never once said, tomorrow will be different, I won't do this, I won't drink, I won't do that. I am not the chapter 3 type of alcoholic. I never tried not to drink, because I never knew that alcohol was my problem, or the drugs were my problem. I had no idea. And for some reason or other, I threw it out. I like to think that it was the long arm of God that just came out and knocked that junk out of my hands, but I don't know what it was. And that was it. And I went and I sat back down. I didn't say anything to anybody, because I wasn't doing them anymore. I didn't know. And 3 days later, I started feeling a little weird. Got the shakes is what I got. And I called this guy that I knew, who I'd sent a couple of clients to, and I asked him what he thought I should do. And he said that he thought I should go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I told him that I really didn't feel that I was that bad. But, for some reason or other, I was willing to accept some direction. And he sent me to a meeting, and I want to tell you about my first meeting. It was called the Whatever Meeting, and it was in Hollywood. And it was at the old IATSE Union Hall. It was a screwy meeting. Just nuts. I mean, if anybody walked in here tonight, nobody would know that this was a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, you guys all look too good. Well, there's Joe back there, but other than that, other than Joe, I mean, everybody else looks great here. We don't look like alcoholics or drug addicts. We look like people that should be at a meeting at a church, But my first meeting, I walked up the steps of this old IATSE Union Hall on Sunset Boulevard, and sitting at the top of the steps was this guy. He had his motorcycle boot off and his sock off, and he's holding his hunting knife about 3 feet over his toes, and he's dropping it to land in between his toes, boom. I didn't think there was anything wrong with that. I just said, all right, man, and I walked on in. And it was real strange getting sober in Hollywood. I mean, there's some crazy people there, And it was before the proliferation of all these recovery houses and hospitals, So the only way you knew anybody was staying sober was you'd look around the room and see who was getting fat. Because, whoever was getting fat was probably staying sober. It's just the way it is. I went from everything that I was taking to a gallon of Dreyer's ice cream every 3 days. And I don't think I ever used a spoon. I just put my face in it. I love that stuff. But I want to tell you how different I was. Literally, I know there's no newcomers in here, or actually there's probably people just like me, because I never raised my hand as a newcomer either. But what I did, as soon as I got sober, I was a different person, changed person. I worked the first half of the first step. I admitted I was powerless over alcohol. Immediately went to 9, started calling people and telling them what a great guy I was today. I didn't apologize to them. I was just telling them what a great guy I was. So I wasn't really doing 9, But I want to tell you how different I was. Prior to getting sober, I used to carry an Ingram 9mm machine pistol with a 47-shot clip and a silencer in my car with me at all times. Well, they're out there, and you got to be ready. And I had to be ready. I only pulled it out once. Just once. Some guy cut me off at the gas station, took my pump. It's a capital offense. I reached under the seat and I pulled out baby. That's what I used to call it, baby. And I slapped in the clip and I cocked it and I pointed at him. And he did the only thing he could have done was he got the hell out of there. Because I don't know what I'd have done. You know, I'd been up at that point driving around for about 3 weeks and I needed gas, you know. And I was in no mood to wait. Well, I want to tell you how different I was. I no longer carried that gun. The DA carried that gun. But that's one of the specific stories I won't go into. However, what I did carry was a little Beretta. 8 in the clip, I also called it baby. 8 in the clip, 1 in the chamber, cocked, hammer back, safety on, right here in a little waist holster. First 4.5 months of sobriety, I carried that gun. Now, I want to tell you something. I want to assure you that I never once pulled it out at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Never once. I reached for it thousands of times. Thousands of times. You people are very strange, you know, especially to a newcomer who's full of fear anyway. You know, it's amazing for me standing up here and to tell you the truth. I did not ever raise my hand as a newcomer. I took 1 90-day chip and 1 9-month chip, and I did not take a cake for my first year. I was too scared. I couldn't stand up here and let you know who I was. I was frightened to death. After about 2.5 or 3 months, I got a sponsor. Wonderful guy, and he told me he wanted me to do a couple of things. He said, I want you to get up every morning, go to the mirror, and say good morning to yourself. I said, I can do that. And I did. I went to the mirror and I said good morning, but I added something. I added the word asshole. Because that's what I thought of myself. And I said that until one day, somewhere between 4.5 and 5 years of sobriety, I realized that I wasn't saying asshole anymore. I don't know why. I guess maybe I stopped thinking of myself along those terms, but I stopped doing it. The other thing he said he wanted me to do, he said, I want you to bound out of bed. Bound. Now, I knew the word. I'd never heard it used in a sentence. I want you to bound out of bed and make it so you can't get back into it. And I thought to myself, how does this guy know that my biggest fear is getting out of bed in the morning? How does he know that? And 3 days later, we went out to lunch, and he started to tell me his story. And he said, you know, Harvey, I want to tell you what my biggest fear is. My biggest fear is getting out of bed in the morning. That I know that I'm a fraud, and I know that everybody's going to find out. And it scares me to death, and that's why I make my bed the first thing, so I can't get back into it. And I was shocked. I was absolutely blown away. I thought I was the only one in the world that ever felt like that. I had no idea that there were other people that felt like me. You know, when they say that Alcoholics Anonymous is simply one drunk talking to another, whoa, that's so important. Literally from that day on, I started listening to the similarities of people instead of listening for the differences. That doesn't mean that I'm always successful at it, but I always try to listen for the similarities. It was amazing. I read my first inventory to him, 35 pages of people that had wronged me, you know, and well, I did what I was capable of doing. When I had 17 months of sobriety, I finally had to go back to court. We'd been delaying this case for 2.5 years, and finally, you know, and by then I'd gotten sober and so on, and we finally had to go back into court. And you've all heard these AA success stories before, you know, miracle stories. He had 50 letters from people in the program telling him what a great guy I had become. You know, there were 10 or 12 people in court with me that day willing to testify to what a sterling character I was. And he looked down at me and he said, Harvey, I want to congratulate you on your obviously sincere attempt to rehabilitate yourself. And I hope that after this hearing, you'll continue along that path. And I thought, wow, isn't that sweet? And then he banged that gavel down and sentenced me to 5 years in state penitentiary. And they dragged me out of court. They had to drag me out of court. My knees gave out. You know, I couldn't believe it. My first thought was, what the hell would he have done if he didn't like me, you know? Second thing was, I took the second half of the first step as soon as I got in that little holding cell. It was a shock. I was on crutches at that point. I'd had my leg operated on, so I wasn't functioning too well anyway. 3 months later, I was back in his courtroom on what's called a sentence modification. He knocked a year off my sentence, so I had a net of 4. And basically, in those days in California, you did half-time. I did 21 months in state penitentiary and 5.5 months in a work furlough house. It's the reason I'm sober today. I needed a place to go where I could make the amends that I would never be able to make. I needed a place to go where it would knock out all of my omnipotence and most of my arrogance. I needed a place to go that people could prove to me that they love me. I used to get 20 to 25 letters a week from people in this program. Every week I had people visiting me. I thought I was the biggest piece of crap in the world, and people were coming down and showing me that they loved me. I had two friends of mine they were amazing. They used to pile newcomers into their car and say, "You think you got it bad? Come on down and meet Harvey," you know. You know, I mean, it was incredible. Now, to tell you the honest to God's truth, I think all that could have been accomplished in about 3.5 weeks, you know. But the second half of the first step clicked in, and that was it. I love that. I always love when people say, you know, you never get what you want, you always get what you need. My sponsor says, you don't get what you want, you don't get what you need, you get what you get. And that's what happened to me. I got what I got. And for the most part, that's what it's always been. Sometimes what I got is what I want. Sometimes what I got is what I need, and sometimes it's just what I got, you know. Nothing much I can do about it. I'll tell you how weird, you know, I'd never been arrested before. It was the lamest thing in the world. I was in that jail for 3 days. I kept on correcting everybody. Before I went to the joint, I was in county jail. They kept on mispronouncing my name. My name is Harvey. They kept on referring to me as homie. And it took me 3 days. Until finally some schmuck called me Homer. And I looked at him and I said, "Man, no Jew in the history of mankind has ever been named Homer. What are you doing?" And then I got it, but it took 3 days, you know. It was crazy. We caught the chain to the joint. Doesn't that sound romantic? The chain to the joint. They handcuff a bunch of fools to a chain, toss their fannies on a bus, and drive them the hour to the joint. Something I want to do on a daily basis, you know. They didn't do that with me because I was on crutches and they didn't want to put me back with the general population. They figured they'd take away my crutches and beat the hell out of me with them. So they put me in this little room, which I thought was very sweet of them, that turned out to be the high power room where they put the murderers. So for about 3 weeks, everybody thought I was some sort of Jewish serial killer, you know, so they left me alone. I'll tell you a couple of stories about what happened in there. It was a lot of fun, as you can tell. I've been down a couple of weeks. I was on this transit yard, which was dorm living, which was just the worst. And I'm lying on my bunk, and I felt the bunk shake, and I looked up, and I knew that life as I had lived it was gone forever. Standing over me was this huge guy, buffed up, all, you know, pumped up with weights, had his shirt off. Everybody in the joint works out with weights. Not me, but everybody else worked out with weights, you know. He got a 3-leaf clover over his right breast, which signifies the Aryan Brotherhood. He had lightning bolts tattooed all over his body. He had Oildale tattooed over his belly button. Oildale's this little city outside of Bakersfield. It's the only city in California has its own Ku Klux Klan clubhouse, you know. He's got SWP tattooed under his belly button, Supreme White Power. And he looks down at me, and I look up at him, and I detect what I think is a little glint of love in his eye, you know. And he looks down and he says, "Is your name Harvela?" And I said, "What?" Now, Harvela is what my mother calls me, you know. Whatever you've ever envisioned a Jewish mother to be, multiply it 1,000-fold, and there's my mom. And what had happened was that she ran into this guy's mother and grandmother out on the visiting yard. And as is her wont, she talks to everybody, you know. She says, "What is your son in for?" And they said, "Alcohol and drugs." She said, "Isn't that a coincidence? So is my Harvela." 6,000 guys in the joint. We're the only two with a problem, you know. But what does my mother know? You know. But she says, But my Harvela has been clean and sober for 1.5 years, and maybe you ought to have your son talk to him. Maybe he can help him. And that's what he was coming to talk to me about. Wanted some help. I got even with him. I'll tell you how alike we were. I was 40 years old, the product of an upper middle class Jewish upbringing in West LA, well educated. He was a 34-year-old street junkie, been coming to joint since he was 14. He was head of the Aryan Brotherhood in the southern prisons. Not prison, but prisons. This guy had more raw power than I'd ever seen in one person's hands. Just incredible what kind of power on that yard that guy had. I got even with him. I got him in the Jewish temple, put a yarmulke on him, you know. Little tallis around him, prayer shawl around him. I said, "Hey man, you want to stay sober? It's what we got to do." mess with me with that Aryan Brotherhood crap, right? I mean, I couldn't believe it. Guy was a sweetheart. The guy really was a sweetheart. You know, sober people up. And sometimes they turn out to be just like all of us in here. Just nice people. I'd like to tell you, he stayed sober. When I got out, after I'd gotten out about 3 years, I went back. Can you believe this? I went back to a banquet inside. A buddy of mine, a homeboy of mine, was back in one more time. He had to go back in 3 more times before he got sober. He's now sober, but before he got sober. So another friend of mine that I helped get sober in the joint, he and I went back in for this banquet, and we actually walked into the joint. It was weird. Walked into the joint, and there were about 40 guys out there that I'd been down with, I'd done time with, who were all out there waiting to say hey to me. You know, nobody says hi, it's hey. Hey, they used to call me Had Money, you know, hey, Had Money. And stay down with your bad self. Now, I never did learn what that meant, you know. I'd say it, but I never stay down, homie, yeah, okay. You know, it's all a new language, you know, it's like Yiddish. I just nod my head and say, yeah, you know, I don't know. But they told me that Randy had just gotten out one more time, and he passed along a message to me, and that was basically he was going to do it this time with the church. And I hope to God he's sober, you know. I've tried to find him and haven't been able to. The other thing that happened to me was I never realized why I got sober. I didn't know if I got sober for me, for my kids, for my girlfriend, for my parents, for the courts. I had no idea why. And the first Christmas there, I was sitting in my cell on Christmas Eve. My cellie was on a family visit with his wife, so you know what he was doing. And I was sitting there waiting for a box of stale cookies and a Christmas card from Dr. Robert Schuller's Crystal Cathedral that says, Jesus loves you and so do I. Cookies were baked last March, you know, it's like, you can't even bite into them. And I'm sitting there waiting for these things, feeling sorry for myself. And a guy walks in and says, Harv, I want to thank you for, I'd done a couple things for him, and he put a quart of Jack Daniels down on my bunk and walked out. And I loved that. Man, I just loved that. And I knew that nobody in the world would know that I could drink that bottle. I could drink that bottle and toss it out through the hole in the screen like everybody else did and just pass out, and nobody would know. And for 10 minutes I sat staring at that bottle. It just lay on my bunk and I just sat staring at it. And finally I picked it up and I walked down the tier and this another guy's cell, and I handed it to him and I said, Merry Christmas, homie. And he said, man, I owe you. And I said, yes, you do. And walked out. And then I realized that the reason, I don't know why I got sober, but the reason that I was still sober was I was sober for myself. I wasn't sober for anybody else. I got out of that place, and I went to this work-fellow house, and I started to work, and I started to rebuild my life. And I want to tell you, I felt no relief. I felt no relief at all. I felt nothing but anger and rage. I was so angry and so full of rage inside of me because I was scared to death. I had no idea what I was going to be able to do. I had no idea if I was going to be able to resume my relationship with the woman that I just adored. I had no idea what kind of work I was going to do. I had no idea of anything. And fear, real fear with me comes out in rage, and I was full of rage. And you know, after I'd been out for a few months, I got this crotchety old judge as a sponsor, you know, and he became my sponsor, and he's been my sponsor ever since. But because I didn't like him, but he had the one thing that I didn't have, and that was self-respect. And he taught me how to respect myself. And something, you know, I don't know what happened. Something clicked in me a couple of weeks ago and I went back and I realized something. I realized after I'd been out for about a year and a half, I came home from a meeting one night around 9:30. Patty was in school, and I came home from this meeting around 9:15 or 9:30, and I was sitting in the living room at our house, and I realized that for the first time that I could remember, I had just gone through an entire day without any fear, and I was totally blown away. I was totally blown away. Now, the next day I was full of fear again, and I mean, it's just the way it's gone, and it's gone back and forth. But for the most part today now, I'm not full of fear like I was. But I remember that first day. I remember that first day, and the feeling was one of total relief. Of total relief. It was like that you know, that first drink that you have, where you take that first drink and you go, That's what I had with that feeling that one day I went through a whole day and I wasn't afraid, and I was blown away about it. I want to tell you about my friend Michael. My friend Michael was my psychiatrist for the 5 years before I got sober. Got married, how do you like that? Whoa, is that a Freudian slip? Jesus. Well, I'll tell you how that came about. We just got a new car, and I called the insurance agent today, and I'm going through this, and the woman on the phone is giving me crap. How come Patty and I aren't married? I'm thinking, and I'd never met her before. She wants an argument. How come we're not getting married? And I told her, we've only been together for 16 years. We're not sure yet, Anyway, Michael kept me alive for the 5 years before I got sober, and didn't help, because in order for a psychiatrist to help, you got to tell him the truth. But he didn't help, but I believe he kept me alive. And then for the 17 months prior to going to the penitentiary, he used to see me 2 or 3 times a week, and that's when he helped. And after I got sentenced, he'd start coming down to visit me. And he'd visit me every 3 or 4 weeks. And he and I and Patty would sit out on the visiting yard, and we became good friends. We became best of friends, We're still best friends today. I just talked to him today, as a matter of fact. It was great. When I got out, the 4 of us used to go out, Patty and I, and he and his lover Hector. He's gay, and he and his lover, and the 4 of us would go out, and the 4 of us became good friends. And about 6 years ago, over 6 years ago, almost 6.5 years ago, Michael called me up and wanted to come over, and he told me that Hector was in the hospital around the block from my house, that he had AIDS. And I didn't know anything about the disease other than it was a plague, but I said those words, what can I do, what can I do? And he said, he said, nothing. And I said, Michael, I believe that I owe you my life. What can I do? And he said, Harvey, you can handle the insurance companies. They're being difficult. And I said, that's easy. I'm an accountant. I can do that stuff. And it's the hardest thing I'd ever done, because their policy is they just wait them out. They know they're going to die. And through the help of the doctors, I was able to negotiate to get them home with 24-hour nurses and so on. And then 2 or 3 days a week, I'd pick up a salad and drive over there, a couple of salads, and we'd sit down and have lunch with Hector. And Hector had people around him that loved him, and he retained his dignity. And about 6 months later, he passed away. And Patty and I spent the weekend with Michael, and then that Monday was the funeral, and we came back after the funeral, and we stayed the rest of the day and evening and got ready to leave, and he came up to us and thanked us, and he said, Harvey, he said, I couldn't have done this without you. He said, you are the kindest, gentlest, most loving, caring, sensitive man that I know, and I love you for it. And I don't know how to accept anything, so I said, okay, and we got in the car and started to drive home, and I realized that I told Patty, I said, Bill, my first sponsor, said, I want you to make a list of the kind of man you want to become. And I looked at him like he was crazy. And I said, man, what are you talking about? I am the kind of man that I wanted to become. I'm this cold, hard, unemotional asshole. That's what I've been striving for all my life. That was my role model, my father. And that's what I had become. And through working the steps of this program and trying to live by the principles of this program, I was no longer that person. Now, I must tell you that I don't necessarily see myself like that. Sometimes I still see myself as that cold, hard, unemotional jerk, and I still have cold, hard, unemotional jerk slips, because it's just the way that it is. It's progress, not perfection. That line has saved my life. But it was amazing. Because of the courage and the dignity that Hector showed in the last days of his life and through his death, he gave me the courage to make the last 2 major amends that I had to make. One of them was to one of the 3 clients that I had stolen money from. 2 of them got paid off by insurance and 1 didn't. And so the one that didn't, I had a phone number, so I called him, and he answered the phone, and I told him who it was, and he was just thrilled to hear from me, He said, what do you want? And I said, I need a mailing address for you. And he said, why is that? And I said, because I belong to a 12-step program of recovery, and one of the steps of that program is that we make moral and financial amends, and I want to start sending you a check. I will never be able to repay you the amount that I stole, but I want to at least send you a check every month, and I'll do so until the day I die. And he said to me, Harvey, I've never wanted any money from you. All I've ever wanted was an apology. I thought that was very nice of him to say that. It wasn't true, but I thought it was very nice of him. I remember a letter being read in open court, about welding the door shut after I got in. But I didn't feel that was the time to remind him of the letter. So I just apologized. And then he said something to me that blew me away. He said, I want to tell you something. I said, okay. He said, a friend of mine heard you speak at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I want you to know that I'm proud of you. And I just lost it. I started to cry. Because you see, I didn't have that kind of compassion for another human being that he had displayed to me. I've learned how to be compassionate by people being compassionate to me. I've learned how to be forgiving by people being forgiving to me. I've learned how to be a friend by people befriending me, and I've learned how to love by people loving me. You know, I knew none of that when I got sober. I knew absolutely none of that. I had no friends. I had no idea how people were and how to act. I really had no idea how to act. People have acted towards me and shown me how to act. That's what's happened. The last major amends I had to make was to the Internal Revenue Service. I didn't file for a while. I owed them $3.5 million, you know, which is kind of a considerable sum. I know I'm the only one in this room that's ever had IRS problems, so I'm sorry, but you know, the truth of the matter was I didn't have the time to file. I was just too busy. And even though it was my profession, I just didn't have the time. And the last thing in the world I was going to do was going to give those jerks any of my money. You know, I mean, I needed it. They didn't, but I did. Well, I had this debt out hanging over my head, so I filed what's called an offer in compromise, and I offered them basically millicents on the dollar, which they promptly rejected, and I appealed. What do I know? You know, and it took them a while for them to hear the appeal. And then I got a notice, and I was going down to the Appellate Division downtown LA for a settlement conference, and the night before, Patty asked me what was I going to say to him, and I said, you know what, I don't know. So I think what I'll do is I'll go in there, and in a general way, I'll tell them what I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm like today, because I don't know what else to do. And that's what I did. I walked in there, and I said to him, can I tell you a little bit about myself? And he said, sure, and I gave him a little 20-minute spiel, you know, and he looked at me, and he said, you know, Harvey, you're an inspiration, and if everything checks out, we're going to make a deal. And I said, go ahead, my life's an open book. I'm not hiding anything. You know, I've got no fear about that anymore. See, that's the beauty of it. I have no fear of anybody checking anything out about me. My life's an open book. I said, go ahead. And they did this inspection, and it took about a year, actually. And it was 4 years ago, last February the 26th. Now, the reason that I know it was February 26th is February 26th is the anniversary of the day I got sentenced to the penitentiary. And I'm sitting at home, I work at home, I'm sitting in my office at home at my desk with my morning cup of coffee, looking at my mugshot. Go figure, you know. I had no idea what I was doing. I guess I was trying to feel sorry for myself or something. And the phone rings. And I pick it up, and the guy says, Harvey, this is Hank from the IRS. And I said, yeah. He said, I just want you to know that everything's approved. The paperwork's in the mail. As soon as you get it, you can start making your payments. It's a 60-month deal. Last week, I made payment number 54. I have 6 more payments left. 6 more left, and it's over with. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and sometimes it's not an oncoming train. Sometimes it's the light at the end of the tunnel. You know, it's incredible to me. It's absolutely incredible to me that it's over with. When I first got out, I wanted to rebuild my tax practice. That's what I wanted to try to do, and thank God, I knocked wood 3 times. Thank God I've been able to do that. But for the first 2 years, I did it illegally. I did not refile with the state of California for my license, because I was afraid. Because one of the questions on the application is, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And I wasn't going to say no, I wasn't going to lie, but I didn't want to check off yes. And finally, after a couple of years, something happened to me. I realized that I was starting to feel guilty, and the one emotion that I cannot handle is guilt. I got loaded for years over guilt, and I can't handle guilt. So I got this application, and I filled it out, and I got to the box that said, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And I checked yes, and then panicked and called my sponsor, you know. And he said, Harvey, he says, we can use Alcoholics Anonymous as a shield, not as a sword. Say, see attached letter, and write him a letter and tell him about yourself. And I did. And I mailed it off, you know, called a few friends who were going to write me letters of appeal because I was used to appealing, you know, whatever, because I knew they were going to reject me. And 6 weeks later, I got the license in the mail. No congratulations, no what a guys, no nothing. They just sent me the license in the mail. It blew me away. It was just amazing. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. 2.5 years ago, I did something I swore I'd never do. I went downtown to the criminal courts building. Matter of fact, in Judge Lance Ito's courtroom, you know, before he became famous or infamous, anyway, I was there filing for a certificate of rehabilitation, which is the first step in being granted a pardon. And it was weird. I mean, it was like this surrealistic thing. I thought I was in the middle of a Fellini movie. I started to hallucinate, you know. There was like mist on the floor. And everybody was walking around in slow motion, talking like this. I mean, it was strange. And then Ito granted me this certificate of rehabilitation. And I walked out of there and I'm crying, you know, and I went down a few blocks to my sponsor's office where he was at the time, and he said, are those tears of gratitude? And I said, no, man, I'm just overwhelmed. I'm just overwhelmed. I can't believe that I'm finally on the road to this thing finally being over with, you know. A little bit over 5 years ago, we were in Seattle at the International Convention. We were in San Diego, but I want to tell you about this meeting in Seattle that changed my life. I didn't necessarily want to be there, especially after I heard the first speaker. But then this woman got up, and her name was Bibi from New York, and I'm going to give her credit. You know, I know in Alcoholics Anonymous, you only have to give credit twice, and then you can take something as your own. But I have to give this woman credit because it was brilliant. She said that she believes that God gives 3 answers. I always thought God gave 2 answers, yes and no. And no is a viable answer, and I've never been able to accept the no, so I stopped asking for anything specific. She said that she believes that God gives 3 answers. Yes, not now, I have something better in store for you. Isn't that beautiful? Yes, not now, and I have something better in store for you. 2 things immediately came to my mind. The first thing was, I accept this right away, immediately. I accept this. The second thing was, you know, I'm a pretty smart guy. How come I can't come up with stuff like this? I'm still a little self-obsessed, you know. But I'll tell you what's happened to me. What's happened to me is because people have shared so freely their experience, strength, and hope with me. And I've seen what other people have walked through, and what I've been able to walk through is that I know if it's not serious illness or death, that I can walk through anything. I'm not going to like the walk. I usually won't like the walk. I usually won't even like the results, but I know that I can walk through that. And the most important thing is that I never have to walk through that alone. Thanks for listening.
Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control is connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.